All right. So, good evening, Dumpy's class. I'm actually getting confused now who I'm speaking to because I'm making screencasts now for the junior class and for the sophomore class. Dumpy's class. Let's just go through some of the reflections you guys made, and what we'll do for Monday is these pages here. All right, 524 to 534 for the quiz on Monday. All right, so let's go through some of these things. So, somebody asked about creating more paper money. I guess a couple of people asked it, that's why I put it up here. Inflation is created when you do that. You can't just create paper money, right? It means inflation. You can print all the money you want, but you're not going to create any more value out of that. That's why I bolded that part of it. The value has to exist prior to that. It's kind of what we're talking about, slaves being the value, and then because slavery didn't exist anymore, the value was taken out of it. By printing more and more money, paper money that is, you're just decreasing the value of the paper money. Okay, so it's not a good thing. Okay, that's, the South already experienced a lot of that throughout the Civil War, so they don't want any more of that. That's, it's not gaining them any credibility. The North, just has that much more, and other countries even has that much more reason to take advantage of them. The South are trying to seek help in the North, right? So some treasury plan idea there, we'll go over in a couple minutes, is really what it's about. The North's not helping the South. That's not what it's about. It's, the North's making money at the expense of the South. This is a market economy. It's a capital society. That's what it's all about. They're not going to help the South. It would actually, cost them to do that. So that's not, the South has to help itself, period, okay? It's about the South organizing, right? And we'll get to that in just a minute. Southern economy was not diversified before. I think we said this a number of times already, but just to repeat it again. The South could have invested a lot of money in a lot of different places, but they chose to forever, to invest money in slaves and slave-related economic spheres of doing things. So they that's what it was. When slavery wasn't there, they lost that. They could have done that stuff. They didn't do it. That's all. All right. So now they're paying the consequences. So we get to the stuff for the quiz on Monday, and just for Monday. Period. At this point, we've kind of begun doing. In some treasury plan, I put the textbook away now. And you really want to take a look at that idea, guys. It can, just like the cotton conversation today, it can become a little difficult to understand if you're not really looking at it. I'm looking at the page now, 525, and storing cotton. So what happens is you have these farmers' unions that have cropped up, right? People that are going through the same sorts of problems decide to organize together, all right, to fix their problems. So you have Southern Farmers Alliance, the Colored Farmers Alliance, right? You have all these different groups that like that. The Grange is another one, right? The Grange movement. These are all farmers who are having a really rough time, particularly in the South, Southwest also, because of cotton prices and all this other kind of stuff. All right, the things we talked about in class today. So Charles McCune, right, is the leader of the Southern Farmers Alliance, and he has this great grand plan. It's called the Sub-Treasury Plan. And what would happen here are these 4 steps. Right, members of this group would agree to store their cotton in warehouses, and if they did that, it would be off the market. And that's really been the problem. There's been too much cotton, and it's such a low price for the cotton, right? 5 cents for cotton, 40 cents for meat. How in the world can the poor man eat? That's what this comes from. So his idea is to do this. So this would give enough time to see the price of cotton increase because you'd be storing it, you'd be keeping it away from the market. People couldn't buy it. So it would take the supply out of it, which would raise, hopefully, offset that with demand, and then they'd be able to charge a higher price for it. While this would happen, the government, so this is where I kind of went asking about before. Where am I here? Right, if you go here, oh, I found it here. Right, so it's not about seeking help from the North. It's about going to the government for help, is what they are trying to do now in Washington, D.C. or local government, okay? So the government would basically give them a loan of 80% of the value of their crops to keep it in the warehouse, okay? Not to put it out there because it's damaging the economy to have that way, right? And they would do this at a low interest rate instead of the high interest rates that banks and merchants have been charging at this point. So just to keep it off the market, they'll pay them basically. The government actually does this kind of stuff today with farmers, because farmers, since this point, really forever, farming's never been an industry where you're going to get rich. It's not. It needs help as an industry. So to move on, McCune and the rest don't get it done. This doesn't work. Right? You urge members of the unions to support candidates who would do this. What happened was you had a lot of candidates, especially Democratic candidates, who would say they were going to do one thing, they were going to help them, A lot of black men are doing this. This is kind of answers part of our question as to why so many black men would join the Democratic Party and annoy people like Anna J. Cooper is one of the things we've been talking about recently. They don't get the job done. They don't do it. But what happens is something really, really important, okay? All of these groups, and there's others we could add to this too, these are all third-party attempts All right, but they all consolidate. It's kind of like what the Republican Party did when the Free Soil and the Liberty Party and all these other groups joined that party. You have the Southern Farmers Alliance, the Colored Farmers Alliance, the Grange Movement, and so on and so forth, all joining a new party, creating a new party that actually combines North and South. So it's not just these Southerners, right? It's Northern farmers too, or Western farmers too. And they create the very, very famous and important People's Party, otherwise known as the Populist Party. Okay, so this is huge. This slide is enormous, guys. You really need to know this. Okay, sometimes this DBQ is just on this party. Okay, so the populist political agenda, there's a whole platform that we'll look at. Okay, that's in here. All right, but the problem is they really can't get a Kickstarter because they need voters. Any party needs voters. They're a third party, so they're trying to make it. Okay, so what becomes important for them is getting the black vote, getting African Americans to vote for their party. But what happens is if they appeal just to them, you have a lot of farmers in this populist party. They've stolen a lot of people from the Democrats, and they believe in white supremacy. So they're not really in tune. Their agenda is sort of a complex one because they can't just grab the African American voters and say come into this party because they look like they're just kind of just appealing to the masses and being demagogues is actually what the chapter says. Demagogue is a great word. It means that you'll say whatever you have to say to get elected and get to your point, which is what the populists look like they're doing if they just cater to African Americans, and they're going to annoy a lot of white people in order to do that. So if they appeal to the black voters, and this is why they're not as successful as they could have been. They're actually successful. They are to a large extent, but only in local places, in the state offices and things like that. At the national level, they're really not. And really the reason for that, and I just took this from the textbook, is that first of all you have an unwillingness or just an inability to mobilize that black vote. Right, and you have a large degree of voter fraud. So you just have people that are really shutting out the populace from the voting. So given those things, the fact that they're populist, they're successful at all is actually pretty cool. So what kinds of things did successful populist politicians do when they got there? Is all about reform. All right. So when you think of the Populist Party and later what's called the Progressive Party, you always want to think about reforms. Okay, progress, progressive, populist. This is the People's Party. How do they want to change politics and make it more for the common person? It's almost like another Jacksonian movement, okay? So, which also is farmers, right? So they reform the way Americans were voting. I just took this from the textbook, right? Simplify voter registration. They're trying to make things more fair because they've been victims of voter fraud, so they know what it's like. Interest rates, right? They want to put limitations on that. Obviously, there's a lot of farmers, right? Cotton and all these other products, right? They've had a lot of problems there. And I just bolded increased expenditures on education because we were talking about because of the lack of tax revenue coming in, that education is really not what it could be, especially in the South. So unfortunately, a lot of these things that do happen are overturned by Democrats. So again, you still have the Republicans and Democrats. It's a two-party system. Populists are just another one of these third parties. They're much more important than the other ones we discussed previous to this as far as the farms are concerned. But what is the purpose of a third party is to voice these opinions. Not all the reforms go away, and they will come back again later with the Progressive Party, because the Progressive Party will really get done what the populists are trying to do. All right. So women's roles in New South is what the chapter goes to. So we're going kind of quick here, right? So they have to deal with a lot of things: lasting effects of the war. We're talking about alcoholism, talking about violence of their husbands, these returning soldiers, and just this really broken down sort of spirit that is happening. So my question is, what kinds of things are women battling with? I mentioned alcoholism in the family and its effect on the family. What kinds of things do they seem to be ignoring? All right, so the question there is really about lynch laws, which we'll get to in a second, what that means. But what kind of things do they seem to be ignoring? The way they have access, right? It's an avenue to being more public-minded. We've always talked about men having the public man, the private woman. Women in the New South, they know their role is to still be private, and that's what it's kind of become for men down there, keeping them in that role. So the South is still very backward in that way, but church is one way they can break that mold. So especially Methodist churches. So this can free them to an extent. Is what I said. So the creation of settlement houses. Remember, a very broken down environment and economy in the South. So especially there, you need these places where people could go and live and be cared for, or whatever else. So it's something again that will come back. All right, in the North, and especially in cities, in New York, and Chicago, and things like that. But in the South, you have this sort of beginning of this because it's needed most there. It really is, in many ways. So, creation of Women's Christian Temperance Union. We've said temperance before as an association with alcohol, right? Why would you create this? Because we've already mentioned what alcohol has done to these former soldiers who can't really get over this loss. In the Civil War for the Confederacy, what we termed already the Lost Cause movement, and so on and so forth. and they've created their own sort of clubs. The United Daughters of the Confederacy, which my mom actually is not a part of, but could easily become a part of because it's her grandparents and great-grandparents who have fought in the Civil War on the Confederate side. I could probably become a member of one of those groups too. I just choose not to. The Arkansas Federation of Women's Clubs and Lone Star Federation were all geared toward what exactly? What are they geared toward? And these are all things we should be considering right now. Lynch laws. Lynching means basically vigilante justice. It means you're not going before a jury. There's no courtroom. It is targeting in the most racist way. Sort of those the vagrancy that exists between in African Americans now. Even it's not that maybe they have done something wrong, but they're not being tried in front of a jury. It's completely unfair. It's really hit its peak with that. And Ida B. Wells will become a great activist against lynching, anti-lynching efforts, and a huge civil rights leader. She'll write about it. She'll write about the lynch laws. Okay, and these are things that we need to remember coming up. So, a couple more things. Segregation is the separation of races, whether it be in schools or in transportation, whatever it might be. And the southern state governments are really drawing that line. I mean that figuratively and literally. They are drawing a line saying, whites here, blacks here. That's it. Okay? And water fountains in cemeteries and schools and transportation and businesses, whatever it might be. All right? And the North, interestingly enough and ironically enough, not all of the North will be segregated to a degree too. But the North actually is desegregating, they're actually changing that because they've been segregated to an extent. Disenfranchisement means to try to limit as much as possible voting rights and rights in general for African Americans. So it's becoming it's becoming more and more, difficult for blacks in the South at this point. How did Jim Crow laws get its name? I'm going to leave that for you to figure out. These are all things that are quizzable for Monday, but I think between the reflections and this outline of those pages, you guys, and I really hope you're watching this because this took like 2 hours to do. So I hope you're watching this. All right, see you Monday.